Oke, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Kita mulai ya kuliahnya. Kali ini saya ke bagian materi pentingnya tata guna lahan dalam perencanaan kota modern, gitu ya. Jadi kota yang nggak modern gimana? Kota-kota ya mereka alamiah, sprawl. Jadi bergerak secara alamiah sesuai kebutuhan, gitu ya. Jadi kalau zaman dulu hidupnya cuma membutuhkan air, pemukiman-pemukiman berawal dari sungai, gitu ya. Terus kemudian mulai ada perdagangan, mulai ada sentra-sentra bisnis, kemudian mulai ada industri, mulai pemukiman terjadi di dekat-dekat pabrik-pabrik dan sebagainya. Tapi mulai dengan adanya perkembangan kota yang alamiah yang mendekati sumber-sumber kehidupan itu, lama-kelamaan dunia merasa menjadi tidak seimbang begitu ya. Jadi ada tempat yang sangat-sangat terlalu padat karena ada sumber kehidupan yang sangat dibutuhkan oleh semua orang. Sehingga dimulailah perencanaan kota modern dengan memperhatikan tata guna lahan, gitu ya, atau zoning. Nah, ini. Jadi apa sih sebetulnya tata guna lahan itu? Ini bisa dibaca sendiri ya, sambil dibaca. Jadi merujuk cara di mana wilayah itu digunakan, diatur sesuai keperluan dan aktivitas. Kenapa? Tadi saya sudah cerita, karena yang terjadi sebelumnya yang muncul secara alamiah itu membuat alam menjadi tidak seimbang. Ada sebuah tempat yang sangat padat karena di situ ada sumber kehidupan, ada tempat yang kosong. Nah, yang sangat padat itu menjadi tidak seimbang, kekurangan sumber air, kekurangan banyak air karena diperebutkan oleh jumlah yang padat begitu. Nah, ini diatur untuk berbagai keperluan, sehingga lahirlah tadi tata guna lahan. Jadi lahannya ditata, penggunaannya diatur, gitu kan? Keperluan sesuai aktivitas. Dia mencakup alokasi dan pengaturan penggunaan lahan untuk misalnya nih perumahan komersial. Jadi kalau digunakan untuk perumahan, fasilitas-fasilitas perumahan mulai dipikirkan. Misalnya ada lapangan terbuka untuk olahraga, lapangan terbuka untuk anak-anak bermain, ada puskesmas. Kemudian kalau industri mulai dipikirkan tuh transportasinya mudah dijangkau dan sebagainya. Begitu juga dengan pertanian, konservasi, transportasi dan lain sebagainya. Suara saya jelas ya?
Jelas, Bu.
Oke.
Jelas.
Kalian kalau ada yang nggak jelas boleh langsung motong pertanyaan ya, nggak apa-apa. Nah, kemudian tata guna lahan itu adalah komponen penting di dalam perencanaan perkotaan. Kenapa? Karena dia membantu mengorganisir, mengarahkan pertumbuhan. Jadi kalau yang ada industrinya begitu, kemudian diarahkan. Kalau dibangun sebuah industri, dia akan padat, makanya dia dijauhkan misalnya dari lokasi bangunan-bangunan bersejarah. Nah, itu perannya. Jadi dia mengarahkan pertumbuhan. Dan kemudian peran tata guna ini tadi ya. Tata guna lahan memainkan peran yang sangat penting dalam pengembangan kota karena berpengaruh pada berbagai aspek kehidupan perkotaan. Nah, ini ada masalah zonasi. Ini ada video. Bagaimana sih kebijakan tata guna lahan membentuk kehidupan kita, gitu ya. Saya nontonnya di YouTube aja supaya bisa diterjemahkan dalam bahasa Indonesia.
Zoning is a way for communities to separate land by use or form. For example, an area could be dedicated to commercial or industrial use, or there could be a restriction on how many housing units can be built. Zoning shapes the places where we live, but it also shapes our lives. Local zoning regulations determine where we can find housing, schools, and parks, and who gets to use them. Policymakers initially created zoning codes to protect public health. For example, to stop residents from getting sick from living too close to factories. But from the start, zoning has separated more than just land uses. It has also separated people. In the early 20th century, many communities explicitly used zoning ordinances to racially segregate neighborhoods, effectively declaring that different skin colors were as incompatible as a family's home and a smokestack. By the late 20th century, civil rights legislation outlawed overt housing discrimination, but those explicit racial barriers were quickly replaced by subtler methods. Even today, exclusionary zoning policies that restrict lower cost or higher density housing limit racial and economic diversity and raise housing costs. By driving up housing costs, restrictive zoning can exclude people from equal access to public resources, like schools and parks, and leave lower-income workers unable to afford housing close to available jobs. When regions are more economically and racially segregated, everyone loses. Local economies see slower growth, and residents of all races are less upwardly mobile. And finally, despite being created to protect public health, zoning often pushes multifamily buildings closer to highways in areas with higher concentrations of air pollutants. As a result, low-income people and people of color are more likely to live in places that could make them sick. It doesn't have to be this way. When done thoughtfully, zoning can connect people and places, not divide us. Communities across the United States are beginning to re-examine the role of zoning and change the restrictive zoning rules, opening neighborhoods to multifamily housing, walkable densities, and more. For more information and resources, and to find out what other communities are doing to improve their zoning policies, go to urban.org/zoning.
Nah, ini kalian tadi memperhatikan bahwa kebijakan zonasi yang ada di Amerika itu erat kaitannya dengan warna kulit dan ras. Dan kita tidak perlu mengalami itu di Indonesia ya. Karena tadi kita nggak secara terbuka membedakan ras. Tapi zaman dulu mungkin ada, misalnya kalau di Semarang itu di kawasan Candi itu milik orang-orang Eropa begitu ya. Kemudian yang di Semarang bawah, Kauman itu milik orang-orang Jawa asli. Nah, itu. Tapi itu kembali lagi yang mengkotak-kotakkan itu adalah orang Belanda yang sedang di Indonesia, jadi gubernur jenderal Belanda yang mengkotak-kotakkan itu. Nah, kepentingannya sih waktu itu tadi untuk pengawasan begitu. Jadi, tapi yang bisa kita tangkap dari video ini, zona yang terjadi dilakukan di Amerika itu menggunakan ras yang tidak diinginkan diletakkan jauh. Nah, kalau diletakkan jauh, kalau dia kerja itu menghabiskan biaya transportasi dan kemudian fasilitas-fasilitas yang dibutuhkan seperti kesehatan dan sebagainya itu dia nggak bisa dapat, dan itu membuat mereka sulit untuk upgrade diri, untuk meningkatkan kemampuan begitu. Nah, tapi kalau kita yang pelajari sekarang di Indonesia ada juga tuh, misalnya kalau kalian bisa membayangkan bahwa teman-teman kalian misalnya yang dari Papua, dari jauh dari Pulau Jawa, memang mereka jadi nggak punya banyak dulu ya, kalau sekarang udah ada internet dulu mereka nggak punya banyak akses untuk mendapatkan pendidikan misalnya karena sekolah di sana susah, bahkan ada yang sekolahnya rumahnya di pedalaman untuk sekolah jauh. Nah, hal-hal seperti inilah yang dipikirkan di dalam penataan zona, bahwa semua wilayah yang ada penduduknya itu bisa memiliki semua akses. Alhamdulillah nih sekarang udah ada internet begini, banyak yang di luar Jawa bisa ikut kuliah bersama kita menggunakan Zoom ini begitu. Nah, terus ini peran lebih detail ya, dalam selain tadi perannya bisa mengarahkan pertumbuhan, itu ada peran-peran lain di dalam perencanaan kota-kota modern. Kota modern sudah dirancang. Satu, pembangunannya itu bisa berkelanjutan gitu ya. Jadi kayak sekarang Pak Jokowi membangun jalan-jalan di Sumatera, di Papua sekarang supaya berkelanjutan. Jadi kalau misalnya nih dibangunkan fasilitas mewah di sebuah pulau terpencil. Nah, kalau pulau terpencil itu zonanya tidak dipikirkan bahwa dia juga dilengkapi dengan segala fasilitas yang sesuai dengan zona, nanti nggak kepake, nanti bangunnya terpengkalai. Makanya terus dibangun jalan gitu ya, supaya zona 1 dan lainnya terhubung. Kemudian pemanfaatan sumber daya. Jadi efisiensi penggunaan lahan, sumber daya itu antara lain adalah lahan. Jadi kalau misalnya nih kita tidak mengatur, nanti ada sekolah yang di pedalaman itu nggak kepake sekolahnya karena memang nggak ada orang usia sekolah di situ. Sementara di tengah kota itu penuh karena sekolahnya lengkap, jadi umur berapapun aja lengkap. Dengan demikian maka diperlukan penzoningan tadi. Pemukimannya baru berarti yang dibuat TK. Kenapa belum ada anak SMA-nya misalnya? Kemudian TK-nya banyak. Kemudian untuk pemukiman-pemukiman baru tadi yang dibuatkan TK digabung gitu ya, ada 5 pemukiman baru digabung dengan jadi satu, kemudian baru disiapkan sebuah SMP misalnya begitu karena tadi memang usianya yang belum. Jadi sumber dayanya itu supaya efisien. Tidak ada yang dibangun mubazir, tidak dipakai, dan kemudian tidak ada yang dibangun yang justru di banyak peminatnya banyak dibutuhkan justru tidak dibangun. Ya. Nah, ini sumber daya alam, energi tadi. Jadi enggak mubazir gitu kan. Kemudian 3 lingkungan hidup. Tentu saja tadi melestarikan lingkungan alam, ruang terbuka hijau dan ekosistem. Jadi enggak semua ditumpuk di perkotaan gitu. Nanti kita lihat ya, Singapura bisa mengatasi kotanya padat, kecil, tapi dia bisa memikirkan ini lingkungan hidup, pembangunan dan berkelanjutan. Nanti kita coba tonton filmnya. Nah ini, terus apa sih yang dimaksud dengan pembangunan berkelanjutan? Silahkan dibaca detailnya ya. Saya akan menjelaskan yang bagian-bagian penting saja. Pembangunan berkelanjutan itu konsep pembangunan yang berlanjut, yang sekarang dibangun oleh bapakmu, nanti bisa dinikmati oleh kamu dan juga oleh cucumu dan sebagainya. Jadi pembangunan itu berlanjut. Dengan demikian kamu sekarang mulai berpikir bahwa apapun yang kita bangun ini, kamu sipil, saya arsitek, itu adalah sesuatu yang kita wariskan. Jadi jangan ngabisin air bersih karena berpikir masih cukup kok. Cukup kalau dipikirinnya makanya cuma kamu serumah. Jadi saya bisa bayar air berapapun, saya bisa bayar listrik berapapun sehingga nggak peduli. Kenapa harus ngirit? Bukan masalah itu. Keborosanmu itu akan mempengaruhi apa yang akan kamu beri. Kalau listrik menjadi habis, kalau air menjadi habis, saat anakmu atau cucumu nanti yang menempati alam ini, itu tetap harus kita pikirkan. Jadi pembangunan itu berkelanjutan, kebutuhan generasi sekarang tanpa mengorbankan generasi mendatang. Ini 3 pilarnya ya, ekonomi, sosial, dan lingkungan. Artinya pembangunan berkelanjutan itu menciptakan pertumbuhan ekonomi yang inklusif. Inklusif itu untuk semua golongan. Jadi bukan cuma kamu, tapi kamu harus memikirkan semua golongan, termasuk misalnya gini, udahlah semua sampah tak buang ke got gitu ya, terus kemudian banjir di tempat lain. Terus sampah di tempat sampah kamu buang tuh sampah zat-zat beracun, kemudian toh nanti akan diangkat oleh tukang sampah. Tapi kalau tukang sampahnya itu menjadi keracunan gara-gara sampahmu, nah itu kamu harus memikirkan tadi lingkungan, menciptakan pertumbuhan ekonomi yang inklusif. Inklusif itu semua orang bisa menikmati kualitas hidup sosial dan menjaga keseimbangan ekosistem alam. Nah, peran tata, jadi tadi ini konsep pembangunannya berlanjutan. Nah, apa sih peran tata guna lahan? Nah, ini tadi alokasinya yang bijak. Jadi tadi menempatkan itu bijak gitu ya. Tidak hanya ini ATM khusus untuk apa? Kalau ATM sih nggak masalah ya. Yang maksudnya tadi misalnya apa sih yang sekarang fasilitas umum? Kalau zaman saya itu dulu ada telepon umum. Kalau sekarang udah nggak butuh telepon. Maksudnya setiap kali kamu mengatakan fasilitas itu itu digunakan oleh banyak orang. Oh, gini aja. Misalnya keran air bersih di sebuah pemukiman ya gitu kan. Jadi tadi alokasinya bisa. Tentunya reduksi dampak lingkungan. Nah, ini yang sering menjadi tanggung jawab kita sebagai engineer sipil maupun arsitek tadi, bahwa bahan-bahan yang kita gunakan ini memberi dampak lingkungan apa enggak. Sekarang kan zero karbon gitu ya. Terus kemudian berapa banyak energi yang digunakan untuk membuat bahan yang kalian pilih. Jadi alangkah bijaknya kalau kalian kita semua memilih bahan bangunan yang sejak dia diproses untuk dibangun itu mengeluarkan sedikit karbon kepada lingkungan. Kemudian tentu saja mengurangi kemacetan. Perencanaan tata guna lahan yang efisien itu mengurangi kemacetan lalu lintas. Duh, ini masalah kita semua di kota-kota besar. Oke, kemudian satu lagi berikutnya adalah pemanfaatan sumber daya efisien tadi, mencakup pengaturan lahan sehingga setiap wilayah digunakan sebaik mungkin tanpa pemborosan. Ini termasuk menghindari penggunaan lahan berlebihan, rumahan, kemudian penghematan sumber daya alam dan energi, mengurangi tekanan terhadap sumber daya alam, hutan dan sebagainya. Silahkan dibaca sendiri. Ini lingkungan hidup, pelestarian lingkungan alam. Ini. Nah, tata kuda yang baik itu tentu saja mampu melestarikan lingkungan alam. Seperti tadi yang saya sampaikan, perkembangan kota yang tidak terencana dan kemudian berada di sungai, tidak ditata, tidak ada saluran pembuangannya, kemudian semua kotoran masuk ke sungai dan sebagainya, itu dia akan merusak sungai, dan dampaknya kalau dia merusak sungai ya pasti banjir, dan kemudian yang terkena adalah manusia yang tinggal di sekitarnya. Bahkan manusia lain yang tidak tinggal di sekitarnya pun akan berdampak. Nah, ini tadi. Jadi kenapa harus diatur ya? Tadi supaya kita ikut melestarikan lingkungan alam, kemudian ruang terbuka dan hijau. Rencana tata baik mencakup terbuka hijau. Jadi kalau ditata dengan baik, kita kan kalian tahu nih apa koefisien lantai bangunan, koefisien. Jadi di daerah-daerah yang akan menjadi penyangga aliran air, tentu saja dia tidak boleh padat. Tapi penduduknya banyak, berarti bangunannya lebih dari satu atau lebih dari dua, supaya masih ada ruang terbuka hijau. Nah, dalam semua kasus, perencanaan tata guna lahan yang berkelanjutan penting dalam menciptakan kota yang seimbang, ekonomi, sosial, dan lingkungan. Dan manfaat tata guna lahan itu supaya tadi meminimalkan kemacetan. Jadi transportasi efisien. Jadi udah ditata tuh, kalau nanti ya kita lihat di Singapura ya ada videonya. Jadi kalau jam tertentu bis menuju daerah-daerah tertentu itu diperbanyak. Kenapa? Karena kita sudah tahu zonanya ini zona pendidikan, ini zona pemukiman. Berarti pagi hari dari pemukiman ke pendidikan itu harus ditambah ketahuan karena zonanya jelas. Ini misalnya kayak tempat saya ini di Mijen perumahan. Sekolah, kalau sekarang sudah banyak ya sekolah. Dulu zaman anak saya itu, anak saya sekarang udah lulus S2. Dari rumah saya ke bawah, sekolah yang paling ramai itu kan di SMA 6, SMA 7. Nah, itu betul-betul udah transportasi umumnya sudah menggila betul, karena memang jamnya itu harus masuk semua pada jam yang sama dengan area yang sama. Nah, kalau ditata benar, itu kan akan meminimal kemacetan. Kamu bisa bayangin kalau sekolahnya zona, ini kampus kita Untak tuh sebetulnya sudah ditata loh zona pendidikan begitu, tapi zaman kita ditata tuh Unisula udah misah sendiri dulu. Unisula sudah ada di Kaligawe itu, dia sudah duluan beli. Gak tahu juga ya kenapa bisa dapat izin duluan. Kemudian peningkatan kualitas itu akses ke fasilitas publik. Jadi bagaimana sih tata guna lahan itu bisa meningkatkan kualitas hidup? Ya karena akses ke fasilitas publik dipersiapkan gitu kan, ruang terbuka. Jadi kalau ini pemukiman ya disiapin tuh 1-2 RT 1 taman itu kan ada standarnya. Nah kemudian nilai propertinya jadi tinggi. Jadi kalau kamu punya rumah punya tanah di kawasan kumuh, nggak ada harganya. Kemudian kalau sudah ditata, terus tanahmu dipindah ke khusus pemukiman, nah nilainya menjadi tinggi, kemudian investasinya jadi menguntungkan. Kenapa? Kalau lingkungannya tambah bersih, tambah bagus, orang berminat tinggal di situ, harganya naik juga orang oke. Kenapa? Karena kan properti itu akan digunakan selamanya. Nah, ini lebih detailnya lagi ya. Kalau yang membuat transportasi itu efisien itu adalah ini, pengembangan infrastrukturnya. Jadi kalau sudah tahu tadi jalannya berarti harus ini yang dibuat oleh Pak Jokowi kan. Transportasinya menjadi efisien, jalannya jadi bagus, nah, kemudian ekonomi menjadi tumbuh. Pengaturan zonasi untuk kemacetan lalu lintas, pengaturan zonasi tepat memisahkan wilayah komersial, perumahan, dan industri tadi. Jadi pemisahan itu akan mengurangi kemacetan. Kebayang nggak sih kalau rumah tinggal di area pabrik? Ya, jadi mobil-mobil gede dan mobil kecil dan motor itu akan membuat kemacetan. Dengan memisahkan area ini, perjalanan tempat tinggal dan tempat kerja menjadi lebih efisien, jadi mengurangi kebutuhan perjalanan jarak jauh, mengurangi kemacetan lalu lintas dan sebagainya. Ini peningkatan kualitas hidup tuh. Ini lebih detailnya ya. Jadi kalau tadi mudah ke fasilitas publik. Jadi kalau di pemukiman tentu saja mudah pemerintah untuk mengembangkan fasilitas kesehatan gitu ya, rumah sakit, tempat ibadah, perbelanjaan. Jadi bukan bakul-bakul emblem-emblem yang itu yang menyediakan sarana seperti itu, tapi disediakan betul-betul sarana apa namanya perdagangan, pasar dan sebagainya. Itu kan ada tata guna lahan. Jadi dipastikan fasilitas ini diletakkan secara strategis, tempatnya mudah dijangkau, parkirnya memadai dan sebagainya. Kemudian tadi ruang terbuka, rekreasi, kegiatan sosial. Kalau di zoning dengan bagus, kita memikirkan di mana letak yang paling ideal untuk hal-hal ini. Kenapa? Karena itu adalah bagian dari kebutuhan manusia ya untuk berada di ruang terbuka, berrekreasi dan melakukan interaksi sosial. Nah, ini tadi saya cerita tadi awalnya kan propertinya tuh menjadi tinggi. Properti itu tadi ya, lahanmu, tanahmu, rumahmu tuh harganya menjadi tinggi. Nah, apa sih hubungannya tata guna lahan yang baik itu dapat meningkatkan nilai properti itu hubungannya gimana sih, Bu? Nah, ketika wilayah-wilayah diatur dengan baik, terus dirancang supaya nyaman, aksesibilitasnya pasti harganya naik. Karena apa? Karena yang suka banyak gitu loh. Jadi kamu kalau pas nanti merancang pemukiman atau merancang apa yang memang properti itu harus dijual, ruko misalnya tentu saja tadi. Gimana sih cara naik nilainya? Ya letakkan pada sebuah zona yang memang sudah tertentu, sudah ideal gitu ya. Terus kemudian investasi jangka panjang menguntungkan itu ketika kota memiliki infrastruktur yang baik gitu ya, terus dia akan menarik investasi bisnis baru. Jadi eh, kalau tata gunanya jelas, ini yang sedang dikerjakan. Tapi misalnya tadi, kalau kalian tahu di Solo itu ada Solo Baru. Nah itu memang di zoning gitu kan, ada mall, ada apa, supaya menarik investor. Kalau kamu pernah ke Solo Baru, kamu melihat bangunan yang mewah-mewah, mall yang mewah, kemudian hotel yang mewah. Kalau kamu berpikir, emangnya orang Solo mau belanja sebanyak mall ini? Masalahnya bukan orang Solonya, tapi investor ya sedang dia pegang. Kenapa? Karena itu investasi jangka panjang. Saat dibangun belum ada orang, tapi nanti pada saat lingkungan sudah meningkat, perumahan sudah mulai menggeser-menggeser dari Solo kemudian ke Solo pinggiran, dari Wonogiri tengah kota ke Wonogiri pinggiran dan bertemulah dia di Solo Baru. Nah, itu menjadi naiknya itu investasi jangka panjang. Dalam semua tiga aspek di atas itu, nih tadi udah tiga ya, perencanaan tata guna lahan yang bijaksana itu memiliki dampak positif bagi kehidupan penduduk, kemudian properti, penduduk itu kita ya, kemudian properti itu aset atau yang kita bangun, rumah, toko gitu kan, perkantoran, ruko, dan pembangunan berkelanjutan di dalam kota itu sendiri. Itu berfungsi untuk menciptakan kota yang nyaman, produktif, dan ekonomis. Nah, ini ada 2 saya ambilkan gitu ya, Singapura dan Amsterdam ini karena anak-anak saya di Belanda. Jadi ini 2 kota yang saya familiar. Ini Singapura ini nanti anak-anak arsitek mau berangkat ke sana. Dekat gitu ya. Nah, Amsterdam. Jadi kenapa saya mencoba memilihkan ini? Yang satu itu tata guna lahannya cermat. Lahannya kecil. Singapura sama Semarang itu gedean Semarang. Tapi dia satu negara. Nah, lahannya kecil, tapi dia bisa maju, modern. Bagaimana sih dia merancang kota dan negaranya itu supaya tetap berkelanjutan tadi. Nah, kemudian Amsterdam itu dia kota di bawah laut gitu ya, sehingga dia harus menjaga sungainya supaya dia tidak tenggelam dan banjir begitu. Nah, ini 2 hal yang kita masih lemah dan mari kita belajar dari contohnya ya. Jam biru ada, oh ya baru 9:30, oke.
This is Singapore's metro system. It serves 2.1 million passengers per day and stretches 200 kilometers. And this is LA's metro system. It serves 178,000 passengers per day and is 157 kilometers in length, which doesn't make sense. I mean, how can 2 places with population sizes that are so similar have so different ridership on their metro systems? Well, it has to do with Singapore's amazing design and incredible public transport. You see, while these 2 systems are roughly the same length, train frequency is very different. Singapore's metro trains come every 2 to 3 minutes during rush hour and every 5 to 7 minutes at off-peak times. In LA, it's a different story. Here they come every 5 to 10 minutes depending on the time. Which isn't great, but that's just because people aren't using them. So why are so many people using Singapore's metro system and not LA's? Well, this is where we get into the ingenious design of Singapore's metro. To show you what I mean, here's the map of Singapore's metro system I just showed you, but overlaid on a map of the population density of the city. And as you can see, the metro system serves all the key areas, but most importantly has a ring that goes through nearly every high population area, serving people who want to go from one side of the city to another rather than having to go through the city center, which isn't the case with LA's metro system. As you can see from this map where I've done the same thing, overlaying the metro system on top of a population density map. Clearly, this system is good at moving people to and from the city center, but not from one edge of the city to another, which could very well be the explanation for the much lower ridership of the LA metro. And just to highlight how much further ahead Singapore is than LA, their official master plan states that they will install imaging sensors and laser scanners below trains to monitor track conditions in real time, to know exactly when repairs are necessary, avoiding unnecessarily long delays and downtimes. But I think it's time we discuss the fascinating car situation in Singapore. See, here a Toyota Corolla costs $99,500, which admittedly is very expensive, but that is by design. And to understand why a Toyota Corolla is so expensive and how it contributes to the insanely good design of Singapore, you just have to look at this map. See, Singapore is an island located here between Malaysia and Indonesia. The country is home to over 5 million people on just 719 square kilometers of land. To put that into perspective, that's half the size of Los Angeles, but with 1.7 million more people. This just goes to show that Singapore has designed its infrastructure to make the most of its small footprint, making it one of the best designed cities in the world. But of course, with such limited land available, the city has taken a unique approach to achieve such success, as Singapore uses a quota to keep the number of passenger cars on the roads stable at around 600,000 vehicles. To enforce this quota, drivers must buy a 10-year certificate of entitlement, also known as a COE, for the right to use the country's roads. At auction, the COE currently runs around $58,000 for a small car or nearly $80,000 for a larger one. That means drivers pay a lot more for the car upfront, but there are still more, as the total cost of owning a Toyota Corolla over a 10-year period is nearly $150,000, which is of course achieved by having the car itself cost about $99,500, as well as insurance, repairs, parking, road tolls, and petrol. Comparing this to a Corolla in the United States that starts at around $20,000, the price seems exorbitant. So it's quite a bit more expensive in Singapore to own a car, and this is without taking congestion charging into account. See, Singapore began charging vehicles to enter the city centre in the 1970s, well before European cities like London or Rome did it. The result is that traffic flows very well, even at rush hour. The average rush hour speed on Singapore's expressways is still 60 km an hour, just a bit lower than the 90 km an hour speed limit. And interestingly, New York City will soon follow their lead and become the first US city to charge vehicles to enter, paying $23 to access parts of Manhattan. Which goes to show that this system must work. And while car enthusiasts might call these anti-car policies, Singapore's government claims it doesn't want to ban cars but just move towards a car-light society. Another way they are incentivizing the use of different modes of transport is their cycling and walking infrastructure. As Singapore is planning a future with lots of ways to get around, the city already has 120 kilometers of cycling paths and it plans to add another 700 kilometers by 2030. Assuming the same quality of bike infrastructure is achieved, that's actually longer than Amsterdam or Copenhagen, even if their cities have much smaller populations. Singapore's plan even includes 21.5 kilometers of continuous bike and bus lanes running north to south by 2026. But their walking infrastructure is a marvel in and of itself, and it might be even more impressive as the city has developed a 200-kilometer long network of covered walkways. In a city with a tropical climate, monsoon rains, and intense sunshine, this is a genius way to make walking an attractive option for its residents. The walkways are especially concentrated around public transport to improve the walk between metro, LRT, and bus stops. It really goes to show how much Singapore cares about its population, further emphasized by their unique approach to housing. And this is where things really start to get interesting. What's incredible is how much of what I'm about to tell you has happened in such a short time frame, since Singapore became an independent nation in 1965. Alright, so when the Housing and Development Board was created in 1960, many residents of the quickly growing city-state lived in overcrowded and unclean housing. So the HDB got to work and quickly started building high-rise flats for its residents with modern amenities like electricity and running water. By 1976, barely a decade after independence, more than half of Singaporeans were living in public housing. During the same era, Europe and the US infamously embarked on public housing projects as well, but the end result couldn't be more different. Take for example the Kuliah housing project, which was built in St. Louis in 1954. It aimed to provide proper accommodation to people living in slums, but in less than 10 years it became one itself, and the massive 30-building complex was demolished after less than 20 years. So how come the result was so different in Singapore? Well, there are a few different reasons. Unlike Kuliah, Singapore's public housing estates include a mix of income groups and ethnicities, which is enforced by quotas. But even just the design of Singapore's public housing is radically different. Major projects are built around, quote, new towns, or hubs with schools, restaurants, shops, and transit within walking distance. Many housing estates have hawker centers which feature Singapore's world-famous street food. Next, Singapore's government has a renovation program to keep older housing complexes attractive places to live. But the most important factor, I think, is home ownership. The Housing and Development Board sells new apartments to citizens for below market rate. But there is a catch. You must keep the flat for more than 5 years, and technically speaking, you don't own it. You have a 99-year lease. Which I know sounds annoying, but are you really going to live beyond 130 anyway? The result of the HDB's approach is that more than 80% of Singaporeans live in public housing today, and 95% of that is owner-occupied. Singapore really has a knack for ambitious construction projects, one of those being the country's Shanghai airport, that is regularly rated the best in the world with its eye-catching jewel fountain and gardens. And the airport is even set to double in size by around 2035 with the addition of Terminal 5, which is designed for an additional 50 million passengers per year. It's truly astonishing. But what's most amazing is that the airport was built on land that used to be underwater. Which leads us to the most fascinating aspect of Singapore if you ask me. See, since colonial times, Singapore has added over 14,000 hectares of land through land reclamation, adding nearly 25% more land than before the British arrival in 1819. Just look at this map to see the land added so far, and then what may be added in the future. Singapore actually has a larger percentage of their land claimed than the Netherlands, which is crazy to think about. But still, no country is perfect, and land reclamation has come at a cost for the environment. An example are the mangrove tree forests that dropped from 75 square kilometers in size in 1819 to just 6.6 square kilometers today. And this is quite sad because these mangrove trees aren't just any type of trees, as they have almost magical properties like surviving in salt water, soaking up huge amounts of carbon, and protecting the coast from storm-caused flooding and erosion. And with most of Singapore less than 15 meters above sea level, it's no surprise the government has tried to replant some mangrove forests. Singapore's rapid continued development has come with other environmental costs though, with only 2 square kilometers left of what was once 400 square kilometers of tropical forests. What's alarming is that some of these remaining forests could be threatened by future rail projects. Since independence in 1965 though, the city has made an effort to reverse environmental degradation. From the beginning, one major goal they wanted to achieve was to clean up the city's polluted rivers, to reduce its reliance on imported water, in case tensions flared up with Malaysia. So they've built reservoirs to catch rainwater, and they now collect the water from 2/3 of the city-state's entire surface. Today, Singapore gets its water from 4 different sources: imported water from Malaysia, rainwater catchment, desalination, and what it calls, quote, new water. And if you're wondering what new water is, it's just a fancy term for treated wastewater. The reservoirs include Marina Bay, which alone can provide for 10% of the city's water needs. But the city's focus on the environment goes beyond just water. In 1967, Singapore's first Prime Minister announced his vision for a garden city. At first, this was mostly planting trees, but the idea has expanded over time. Today, the city boasts 7,800 hectares of green space, including 4 nature reserves. And since 2009, developers have been required to replace the land they take up with green spaces. This requirement has led to green buildings across the city, like the 340-meter-long Sky Park on top of Marina Bay Sands. The city's Skyrise Greenery project aims to add 200 hectares of green walls and roofs to buildings in the city by 2030. The government is providing incentives too, offering developers up to half of the installation cost for green roofs and walls. By 2030, the city's green plan aims for all residents to live 10 minutes or less from a park, which is great news. I mean, I know firsthand how much joy I get from living close to a park here in Copenhagen. But anyway, most amazingly of all this is how Singapore has managed to accomplish it all in less than 60 years. And the reason for this might be its peculiar government. See, while Singapore is a democracy, the People's Action Party has maintained a monopoly on ruling the island city-state, giving them the time to plan long-term projects without worrying much about opposition. This situation has allowed for this massive construction of infrastructure and housing. Of course, progress has come at a cost. Beyond the environmental damage, much of Singapore's architectural heritage has been lost to development. See, the city used to be dotted by these kampongs, which are small villages with a unique architecture and rural lifestyle. Today, only 2 kampongs survive. Still, since the 1980s, huge effort has been put into preserving the city's iconic Chinese stophouses, with over 7,000 buildings now legally protected. But the government is now prioritizing incorporating historical structures into new developments, like the Great Madras Hotel, which was built as one of the city's first public housing projects in the 1940s. So yeah, Singapore isn't perfect, but its solutions for transport, housing, and green spaces are a huge inspiration, and it's no doubt an insanely well-designed place. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Iya, tadi kita sudah berkunjung secara virtual. Ini ada lagi. Nah, ini bagaimana dia menyiapkan sebuah mega city. Jadi kota besar yang harmonis Jadi bangunannya itu menjadi sebuah kota karena ada berbagai fasilitas yang disiapkan dalam setiap bangunan besarnya. Duh, ini sama. Oh, tadi.
The species in this building is higher than the species on that ground park.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is very nearby. So,
Wait, so there's more species within this construction than in like a natural space of the
Correct.
same amount of greenery.
Yeah, correct.
That's incredible. Thinking about an entire city built like this,
Yeah.
basically you're talking about reforestation and urbanization as sort of one and the same.
correct.
In every city I've ever lived in, green spaces felt like an escape. They were in the city, but not of the city. But here in Singapore, nature is always around you, and that's by design. A design that not only benefits our own species, but other species too. So what can we learn from Singapore? How do you design and build an environment where nature and urban life coexist and even thrive together? I'm Shane Campbell-Staton, and this is Human Footprint.
Is it your first time in Singapore?
It is. Man, this place, I've never seen anything like it. It's incredible. If you ask Pearl Chi, she'll tell you it's no miracle. It's all part of the plan.
We are challenging ourselves as architects, whether
Yeah.
we can design better. We are creating a lot of concrete buildings. It's like a concrete jungle, but we really want to bring the jungle in.
Pearl is the architect who designed the Kampong Admiralty, the building we're standing in now.
Our design concept, it's a very unique combination. We actually have elderly housing, public housing,
Okay.
combines with healthcare, which is the medical center, commercial, and some social programs, and a food court. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So that's why it's not gated. It's very
Okay.
open. Anybody can actually come in and use the facilities. Yeah.
Singapore is the third most densely populated city in the world. The entire country is an island with only 281 square miles of land, but 5.5 million people live here. In a city this dense, you wouldn't expect much room for nature. But it's like they say, where there's a will, there's a way. And by will, I mean law.
Legislation enables it to happen. The building took the land. So we need to do replacement. The legislation actually requires the building to give back 100% landscape.
Oh.
100% of the site footprint has to be replaced into the building.
For like every square inch of like green space that you take up, you have to put
Put
back in into
yeah.
the building somehow.
Into the building.
A few years after completing the building, Pearl's firm surveyed the animal life in Kampong Admiralty's gardens. 50 different species had moved in. This development is a microcosm of what's happening all over Singapore. It's not just one building or designer or architecture firm. The whole city is teeming with life. As a biologist, I think a lot about, sort of wildlife, specifically in urban spaces, right? And how urban environments can be very stressful, very different environments. But your job has been the opposite, right? To make urban environments very much like wild environments in a lot of ways. What is your approach to increasing biodiversity in a space like this?
So visually, we want to have some interest in the landscape. And secondly, we introduce a lot of edibles. So you see a lot of fruit trees actually here. Yeah. So that attracts the birds, mammals, and insects. And also because we did it in a cascading form, so it's actually quite connected all the way to the ground floor.
Okay.
Yeah, so the landscape is actually connecting. We have a system of collecting the water as well. That's why the cascading planters, the water actually get filtered through all the way.
Just by gravity.
By gravity, yeah. So we have cascading landscape over there, the planters, and the water kind of come through under the planter. And actually, this is a rain garden that collects all the filtered water from all the planters. Yeah, and then it gets stored in the tanks underneath the apartment blocks. We have 2 rainwater harvesting tanks underneath, yeah, and then it get pumped up and rewater again. So we're trying to recycle water.
As you sort of like move around the city now,
Yeah.
do you go to places and you're like, oh, this is my baby?
Yeah, all the time.
Professor Chong Poon Hyen is a music lover and lifelong Singaporean. She's also a legendary urban planner. A lot of folks credit her with shaping Singapore's singular urban landscape.
This is one of my favorite neighborhood centers in a public housing estate.
Okay.
Because in Singapore, 80% of the people live in public housing in estates like this.
Oh, wow.
In highly affordable housing.
Kampong Admiralty, the building Pearl Chi designed, is public housing too. And these places are cush. The apartments are modern and clean. The amenities are incredible. And most developments are a 10-minute or less walk from public transportation. And of course, everything is draped in greenery, from the street level to the tops of the skyscrapers. Where I come from, when we say public housing, basically, like, we call it the projects. And I was actually, raised a lot in public housing. And that public housing and this public housing are not the same thing.
Well, you can't believe it when you come to Singapore today, but say about 60, 70 years ago, actually Singapore was a nation of slums and squatters. It was also polluted and lots of traffic congestion. Well, Singapore was a British colony, and actually if you look at the transition, in 1819, when the British so-called founded Singapore, we had like 200 people on the island.
Oh, wow.
But today we are 5.7 million. So you can imagine that rapid urbanization that took place.
When Singapore gained its sovereignty from Britain in 1959, it was a city of 1.5 million people and massive unplanned sprawl. Tens of thousands of people had no place to live. So the newly elected government created the HDB, or Housing and Development Board.
And within 5 years, the HDB, they already built 51,000 units of flats. It started from very basic housing, but now, of course, the quality is a lot better, as you can see around you.
Yeah. And public housing is just the beginning.
Singapore is a very small city-state. It's actually only half the size of metropolitan London.
Oh, wow.
But we are a country. We're not just a city. So everything you need about a country, whether it's for water, power generation, ports, airports, plus housing, shops, offices, industry, all has to be built within this tiny island city-state. And so biodiversity and ecological balance became really quite an important concept. Now, as we develop the land, of course, we start to lose space for planting. So what did we do? We decided to move the greenery upwards into the sky. And so what you did is you just created new space. And suddenly you bring back all the biodiversity.
Back in the States, urban areas and wildlife are sort of like oil and water. They don't mix very well. But what you've done here is something very, very different.
Over the years, we moved from being a garden city to a city in the garden because we started to plant so extensively. And in the last decade or so, we moved from a city in the garden to city in nature.
In a place where you have limited space and you have this growing population, that there are two very sort of competing needs.
Shane, absolutely. There's always competing needs, right? So it's really this very important balancing act of allocating the right amount of land for different uses to create this type of an environment.
So what do you think a Singaporean gains by having nature sort of infused within the urban environment as opposed to like setting aside like natural park space, like national parks?
There's a lot of science behind planting, for example, to thermal comfort. And the right plants, if it's planted along pathways, it provides a lot of shade.
Despite being an island nation where 100% of its population lives in urban areas, this city-state is known as the greenest city in Asia. Here, green takes on many meanings, and high on that list is shelter from sweltering heat in this tropical environment. Plants and vegetation play a big part of that, lowering the air temperature by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius.
So in fact, in the design of the towns, we use a lot of computer models. The way you juxtapose your buildings with parks and open spaces, you bring in the breezes, which is important to cool the town and for better air quality and natural ventilation. And of course, we bring back biodiversity. If you plant the right type of plants, you can get back the butterflies and the dragonflies, and you get the lizards, monitor lizards coming back.
I've seen several like really large monitor lizards in the city. And who orchestrates this balancing act? It's the Singaporean government with their comprehensive master plan for managing the city-state's ongoing growth. By centralizing the control of urban development, Singapore paves the way, you see what I did there, for projects that fuse function and form.
If you look behind us, the Punggol Waterway is actually a man-made river. We dammed up 2 rivers to become freshwater reservoirs. Now, the engineers wanted to connect the 2 reservoirs with a pipe. Very functional.
Yeah.
But then the architects and the planners say, why do a pipe? Why don't we make a river? And so this river connected the 2 reservoirs to balance and optimize the storage of water. But at the same time, it became a leisure facility. So Punggol has a nickname. It's the Venice of Singapore.
Oh, that's amazing.
Because of broadening water, right?
It has its aesthetics, but everything also serves
Function.
a very
It has a
specific function.
Even the Punggol Waterway, there's a family of otters that have come back.
Oh, that's incredible.
They live on the Punggol Waterway.
Singapore challenges a lot of what I thought I knew about cities. No one's saying that we should all be like Singapore, or even that we could be. This place is unique. 90% of Singapore's land is publicly owned. The government determines what gets built and where. And with everyone sharing the same tiny island, by definition, they're all in this together. Most places don't have all that. But I'm not sure we need it to reimagine what cities can be. I think the thing that stands out to me about Singapore is the intentionality. I'm not sure if this specific model can be applied anywhere or everywhere, but I think they're doing things that I think other cities can learn from.
We have to get our act together to make cities effective. Creativity, innovation, and that will to survive and to want to do well are very, very strong drivers. That's human beings, right?
Yeah.
That's what we are.
If you want more human footprint, you can tune in to the full-length series on the PBS app or your local PBS station. Check out the link in the...
Nah, ini Amsterdam. Testing, apakah kalian masih tune in?
Masih.
Oke.
Masih, Bu.
Ya, mudah-mudahan bisa menikmati pembelajaran ini.
On the 8th of July, 2021, Amsterdam city government adopted one of the most ambitious environmental visions for a city and the plans to
Bicara
achieve
tentang
it
zoning
in
soalnya.
history. The Dutch government features one central government, divided over 12 provinces. Beneath them are hundreds of individual municipalities. Municipalities can range from cities to towns, and they form a legislative body with a plural executive. Unlike many other countries, burgemeesters, mayors, are not elected in the Dutch system, but selected, and they form a pseudo-executive branch with wethouders, who are appointed by the gemeenteraad, the legislative body. In 2021, the Omgevingsvisie, roughly translating into environmental vision, was passed. A somewhat vague document by Dutch standards, it still sets out a detailed plan for how the city can and will develop over the next couple of decades. Amsterdam is separated into the following boroughs, the center being the most historically famous for its canals, red light district, and drunk British tourists. To balance the increasing pressure on the center, the city has focused in on making the other boroughs more attractive in themselves. In Nieuw-West, Zuidoost, and Noord, Amsterdam's largest transformations are taking place. Noord, located across the IJ, has been seen as historically separate, the borough inconvenient to travel to, requiring either travel by ferry and car. But in 2018, a metro connection made Noord a focus point for urban development in the city, attracting investment and gentrification. But the metro line and existing ferry networks are not enough to weather the increasing demand for public transportation from the growing city population, especially when the city has also committed to not increasing car traffic. And to solve this, the city has planned for the construction of additional bridges, located at the center and on two opposing flanks, reducing the bottlenecks on transportation and making Noord a more desirable place to live. In all three boroughs, the city is planning on investing massively in constructing higher dense areas in order to create sub-centers within the overall city. In all three, attempts at producing more mixed residential and business zoning so that the city can attract more middle-class families. These high-density areas are also generally located close to transportation nodes, and the city will also attempt to add regional hubs for cars located near stations, extending the metro network, reducing the maximum car speed, and adding additional bike paths on the already existing network. But all of these changes are a reflection of one major goal: increase the density across the entire city, converting sections of the city into different islands of density, which pushes the focus outside the historic center. And this is where a seeming contradiction emerges. How do you increase houses while also trying to increase the city's overall green space? Like a deformed hand, one of Amsterdam's most unique features are its green wedges, large areas of green landscape that tunnel their way into the city, providing, in theory, readily available access to green space for everyone. In the early 1900s, European city planners investigated and debated how the growth of a city could be balanced with maintaining green spaces and reducing sprawl, and there were many different ideas on how this could be achieved. Entire belts of green surrounding entire cities, implemented in large part in England, or wedges, which could also vary significantly in how they were designed. The Netherlands was one of the European countries that pioneered the use of green wedges, and their connection to Amsterdam can be traced back to the 1920s, to a vision by Hendrik Weideveld, a Dutch graphic designer and architect who proposed that the city should follow a green wedge design in his works Chaos and Order, dividing the outside of Amsterdam into different equal wedges, which would constrain chaos into clearly delineated order. He also made elaborate plans for a People's Theatre, which would be situated in Vondelpark near Amsterdam's main cultural institutions, and represent a symbol of fertility, welcoming the mass of people designed as if they were small seeds that aspire to reach the inside of the theater space, a real and true maternal womb. It wasn't until around a decade later, though, that a young architect, Cornelis van Eesteren, would actually end up making the green wedges a reality for the city. Van Eesteren worked for Amsterdam's town planning department for over 30 years, as well as serving as the chairman of CM, the International Congress of Modern Architecture, but then in more complicated French, the organization that helped influence the modernist principles in architecture that inspired the Bijlmer 3 decades later, which also deserves a video of its own. Influence behind the ideas of creating a functional city, Van Eesteren produced the Amsterdam Extension Plan in the 1930s, which introduced a network of green wedges that would start in Amsterdam and then widen themselves out into the green heart of the Netherlands. A large green area that is sizing itself up to become one of the most important sections of the country, maybe even Europe in its entirety, over the coming decades. Many on the outside look at Amsterdam in isolation, a single city with a rich history that stands on its own. But this is wrong.
Dat wij in Nederland ons realiseren dat Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Den Haag en Utrecht eigenlijk één stad is. Met het groene hart daartussen is een beetje groot uitgevallen Central Park. En wij moeten deze 4 steden het werk laten doen een New York te worden van de 21e, 22e eeuw.
Amsterdam is part of a much larger whole, the Randstad, one of the most overlooked metropolitan regions on Earth. the fourth largest in Europe only after London, Paris, and the Rhine. It's an urban cluster of the Netherlands' most economically valuable cities, Amsterdam, Den Haag, Rotterdam, and Utrecht, including many other important municipalities and townships. And where many cities across Europe stand individually, pressured to expand with little constraint outwards, the Randstad is unique for being a cluster of cities individually expanding within incredibly close proximity, with the option to travel to multiple cities within the cluster in under 2 hours using public transport. The Randstad area, home to nearly half of the country's population, mirrors Amsterdam's individual problems, a growing pressure for new housing while also maintaining high-quality green space. The Randstad has put increasing attention on how the Groene Hart should be regulated and the landscape preserved, both for the residents living there and also as a vital green space for the people living on the outside of it. Concern for this development, which will be under increasing scrutiny over the next few decades, has practically locked expansion into the green wedges, as the Amsterdam city government also has to manage negotiating scarce public land with other municipalities. Instead, they will continue to focus on producing the high-density areas in the places already existing between each wedge and on their borders, while attempting to make the wedges more attractive for the pedestrians living between them. One of the ways of doing this is by targeting the highways that border them, which can constrain access. By converting business areas into mixed residential zoning, which brings in a larger amount of city government revenue, the city government can then gather a war chest that can be used to redevelop the highways so they can provide more green space and/or better access to it. This is happening alongside millions in investment for more green spaces in the city overall. And although the plans are relatively vague on how this will be achieved, it's clear that the goals are to link green spaces in the city, creating an interconnected network, while also making street-level changes directly. This means installing green roofs on the homes that can handle it, and replacing tiles on sidewalks, which for some reason the Dutch are obsessed with it. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. But the green is also necessary to solve a more nefarious problem. Rain. Amsterdam has, and will continue, to see more extreme weather, which contributes to flooding and to city damage. A way to solve this is by individually equipping homes that together can solve the larger problem. In front of old or new buildings, you can make space for gardens with water-hungry plants by getting rid of street tiling. Then create subtle cuts in concrete, a design feature so simple that it's genius, connect the drains and then rig it so that if the water supply is too much for the dirt plant sponge, it can then filter through the larger city drain and only then impact the water network. Do this with enough homes and we might have a chance for handling extreme weather events. The Netherlands is a good country, and plenty of people know that the Dutch are good at water, but much less know why the Dutch are also so good at being so critical.
Meneer Klaver, goedenavond. Welkom.
And that's because, to maintain the system that would defend them against walls of death, the Dutch would require a massive coordinated effort. If you don't critique your neighbor's dike building abilities, you die. And although history is always difficult to draw trend lines through, the culture that had to be developed to maintain the system has been connected with the consensus structure that takes place in all facets of Dutch society, including, of course, the development of Amsterdam. And so, if you're interested in the future of this city, make sure you call up the gemeente and piss off the wethouders, because not only is that in your right, but they're also getting paid way too much not to be criticized. And at the end of the day, what Amsterdam's plans envision can be very different from what is possible. The corona crisis required a large amount of the city's budget, and the most recently chosen coalition of D66, PvdA and GroenLinks has to make some very difficult decisions. They can reduce their ambitions by failing to deliver on their infrastructure plans, or they can attempt to still get close to reaching their goals by making the locals foot the bill. But what makes Amsterdam one of the most beautiful cities on earth, a hill I'll die on, is that it knows how to iterate and learn. And so whether everything in the plan comes to be is a separate matter, but whether this city has the best chance to actually lay down an ambitious plan and vision for the future and come close to actually realizing it, that's without question. Before you click off, I want to say that I'm giving 2 books away, and all you need to do is be subscribed to this newsletter on Twitter. One is in Dutch and on Amsterdam.
Oke. Bentar, ini jam berapa? 10.10. Ini materi terakhir. Video ini bicara tentang future smart city. Dan kemudian kalau ada pertanyaan disiapkan di chatting ya, supaya bisa saya lakukan kalau saya respon. Ini adalah materi terakhir. Terjemahkan dulu. Ini smart city yang direncanakan sampai 2050 di berbagai dunia ya.
Aging city designs are beginning to struggle to support everyone that relies on them. And this means planners are going back to the drawing board to develop urban spaces of the future by incorporating the latest technologies and reducing the overall environmental impact. Development is already underway on a number of them, so in this video we'll be taking a look at 7 incredible futuristic cities that are planned by 2050. Before we dive in, if you haven't already, subscribe to Most Extreme and ring the bell to get notified of our latest videos. Net City, China. Tencent is China's answer to Google, having dominated the country's online space for years. Just like its American counterpart, it has generated a huge fortune that is now being reinvested into developing technologies and ideas for the future. One of which is Net City, a space that will begin as a futuristic city campus for the company's employees. Located on 320 acres of empty space in Shenzhen, China, work is already underway to build Net City, and the plan is for the first people to be able to move in by 2027. The size of Midtown Manhattan, the company will, of course, benefit from having its employees so close to where they work. But the idea is far wider than just that, with the hope that it'll provide a blueprint for future urban designs around the world. At the centre of the development will be the new corporate offices for the company, but surrounding these will be everything residents need for a fulfilled lifestyle. There will be homes, schools, recreational areas and stores, all of which will be arranged in a way that makes them easily accessible by foot or public transport, with no need at all for personal transportation like cars. The significantly reduced pollution will maintain a much higher air quality than any other urban environment, and this will be taken a step further by the inclusion of grass-covered rooftops on every building, and systems that will collect water for use by residents, while at the same time managing the runoff and preventing flooding. Green energy will make up the vast majority of the city's power requirements too, with the intent being that the entire place will be carbon neutral. If this project proves to be successful, we could well see large companies following in their footsteps and building cities of their own, which would completely change the way we see our work and home-life balance. Woven City, Japan. With cities around the world looking for new technologies to help reduce pollution and increase efficiency and living conditions, companies are developing new ways to test their designs in a real-world setting. Toyota is currently building Woven City, which is being envisaged as a prototype city that will be used to prove the viability of new ideas before they are deployed elsewhere. Covering an area of 175 acres on the former site of a car manufacturing facility and at the base of Mount Fuji, the city will be able to house up to 2,000 people, most of whom will be Toyota employees. Everything will be powered by hydrogen fuel technology, and it'll be there that the company tests new autonomous vehicles, smart home technologies, robotics and other creations, making it the most futuristic city in the world. One of the cleverest parts of the city is that it will use 3 different types of street or pathway that are woven together. The first type of street will be solely for fast vehicles. The second will be for slower ones like mobility scooters, bicycles, scooters and pedestrians, while the third type will be like promenades, which can only be used by pedestrians. Due to be ready within the next few years, Woven City will show how a changed view towards urban planning, in combination with new advances with technology, will completely change the way we look at cities and what life in them should be like. Eco-Atlantic City, Nigeria. The city of Lagos in Nigeria is one of the fastest expanding urban areas in the world, and planners have been looking for ways to redesign regions fit for the future, while at the same time helping to preserve what's already there. Eco-Atlantic City is one of the most ambitious developments taking place anywhere on Earth, and will create an incredible space to supercharge the local economy for decades to come. Covering an area of almost 4 square miles, the entire city is actually being built on a newly created peninsula attached to the Victoria Island district of Lagos, which has required millions of cubic yards worth of materials and tens of thousands of tons worth of rocks to be reclaimed from the Atlantic to form it. Surrounded by a 5-mile wall designed to protect the land from being eroded by the ocean, its presence is also expected to slow down erosion further along the coast, which will protect other parts of Lagos too. Split into 10 separate districts, once it's complete, Eco-Atlantic City is expected to be home to 250,000 residents, most of whom will commute into Lagos each day for work. All structures will be built with environmental standards in mind, with the plan being that the power usage will be provided by green sources on the peninsula itself, and there are hopes that it will also become a tourist destination in its own right. Akon City, Senegal. It takes a visionary to get an ambitious project off the ground, and in the case of Akon City in Senegal, the man behind the plan is none other than Akon, the internationally renowned recording artist and entrepreneur. According to the man himself, the idea for the city was inspired by the Black Panther movie, and this is his attempt to create a real-life Wakanda. Planned to cover an area of 2,000 acres around 62 miles from Dakar, it'll be a mixed-use development comprised of huge skyscrapers, shopping malls, tourist resorts, entertainment venues, a technology hub, and a large music recording complex. With an estimated price tag of $6 billion, all energy that's used will be derived from green sources, and the hope is that it'll massively stimulate the local economy. The buildings will all have an otherworldly aesthetic, with sketches showing they'll look like they've come straight out of a sci-fi movie. But the most futuristic thing of all will be the economy. Rather than using cash or any traditional fiat currencies, everything in Akon City will revolve around the use of its own cryptocurrency, called the A-coin. Masdar, United Arab Emirates. With the world trying to move on to alternatives to fossil fuels, countries like the United Arab Emirates are using their vast wealth that has been derived from oil to invest in strategies to keep their economies just as vibrant in the future. And one of the ways they're doing this is the development of new futuristic cities like Masdar. Construction is already underway on a 2.3 square mile site around 11 miles to the southeast of Abu Dhabi, and despite a number of delays, it's hoped that it'll be complete by 2030. At an approximate cost of $22 billion, the idea is that it'll be fully powered by renewable energy, will employ novel water collection and recycling techniques, and will become a hub for companies working in green industries. It's already home to the headquarters of the International Renewable Energy Agency, and has also attracted scientific and technology institutes to set up there too. Eventually, it's expected to be home to up to 50,000 people, with a further 60,000 commuting to the city each day to support the 1,500 businesses that will be based there, all of whom will use the public mass transit system instead of personal vehicles. Starbase, Texas. Cities of the past were built around sources of natural resources, such as rivers or important structures like churches, and it's likely that the cities of the future will follow this principle too, although around more modern structures. Starbase in Texas will become one of the best connected places in our solar system, because at the center will be the main launch facility being operated by SpaceX. The rocket launch base has already been constructed in Boca Chica village at the southern tip of Texas, and Elon Musk hopes that the presence of his company will encourage the place to regenerate and expand around it, creating the world's premier technology center with access to outer space, as well as fast connections with elsewhere around the world. To do this will require a huge investment in infrastructure, with Musk already committed to developing a public water provision system and the development of a natural gas plant, as well as overcoming local resistance to his grand plans. While Starbase may well be a pipe dream right now, the billionaire visionary shouldn't ever be counted out, and if anyone's able to create a spaceport city, then it surely will be him. Neom, Saudi Arabia. We normally think of cities as being huge developments, based around a central point. But what if we completely rethought this idea and built them in a linear fashion instead? That's exactly what's happening with Neom, a $500 billion cross-border project that's underway in eastern Saudi Arabia. At its core will be a 105-mile-long linear city that will become home to 1 million residents, around which the rest of the city will be built. No cars will be used there, with a green energy mass transit system being the main means of moving people around, and the plan is that every daily service needed by residents will be accessible within 5 minutes walking distance from where they live. It'll be powered by green hydrogen energy plants, be designed to conserve energy as much as possible, and will focus on being a hub for international companies to drive further investment in the region. To make this possible, huge advances in technology are needed, such as faster trains that will run underground, and an artificial intelligence system that will be used to monitor what's happening in the city, to react to developing issues, and improve overall efficiency. Could you imagine yourself living in any of these cities within the next few decades? And do you have any predictions of your own about what the future of urban spaces will be like? Make sure to let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to Most Extreme and ring the bell to get notifications.
Oke, sekarang udah mulai punya bayangan ya, seperti apa perencanaan tata ruang kota masa depan yang akan kalian alami. Ada yang mau bertanya?
Tidak, Bu.
Tidak. Kalau gitu kuliahnya saya akhiri ya. Kasih 9 menit. Oke, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Terima kasih, Bu.
Ya.